everyone. Welcome to the third event of this DDD, Digital Delights and Disturbances lecture series for this semester, fall 2025. You know, the lecture series is organized by the Communications and Media Studies Department here at John Cabot. My name is Valentina Tanni. I am a lecturer here. I teach a few classes in the department, and it's an honor for me to introduce today's guest, Elisa Giardina Papa. She's an Italian artist, researcher, and professor. And I am particularly happy to have Elisa here today because she knows I'm a big fan of her work, and I've been following her research and art production for several years now. I also wrote a few texts and articles about her work in the past. So Elisa received an MFA from Rhode Island School of Design. Correct me if I say something not correct. She also has a PhD in film, media, and gender studies from the University of California, Berkeley. And she is currently an assistant professor of modern culture and media at Brown University. She lives in New York, but also in Sicily, in Sant'Ignazio, right? And she's from Sicily. And her work has been exhibited internationally in a lot of many important venues and institutions around the world. I cannot possibly mention them all, but just a few of them. For example, the Venice Biennale, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Whitney Museum in New York, ICA London, HKW Berlin, but also Seoul, Buenos Aires, Hong Kong, many more places around the world. Elisa is also a founding member of an artist collective called Radha May, together with Indian artist Nupur Mathur and Ugandan artist Bathsheba Okwenje. Now, a few words before I leave the floor to Elisa about her work. In her work, Elisa takes a very interesting research-based approach. So it's an artistic research, but it's rooted in research. In fact, she investigates certain kinds of knowledge and desires that are normally dismissed or partially erased by dominant systems of power. She works with many different materials. She has been working, for example, with censored films, with colonial records, and recently with AI training datasets. The goal is to show how global capitalism and imperialism have kind of impacted our culture, our lives, our working conditions in so many different and profound ways. She uses a lot of different media. Her work includes video installations, experimental movies, also internet-based projects. Always focusing on those parts of our lives which resist to what she calls hegemonic demands for order and legibility. That's why she is going to talk about incomputable data. Her work, I think, can be contextualized at the intersection of art, technology, and cultural studies. And I think that it represents a great example of how new media art can be an incredibly powerful tool that can help us reflect on the cultural impact of emerging media through a framing that is very peculiar, because it's a framing that is both critical but also poetic. Artists often take a very unconventional approach to new technologies, and so they establish very unique frameworks to explore how media transforms not only our aesthetic perception, which is of course obvious with art, but also other aspects of our lives, for example, emotional states, communication practices, and cultural narratives in general. Her talk today is titled AI, Labor, and Incomputable Data. And Elisa will talk about all the different theoretical and archival aspects of this research, specifically in relation with a work called Cleaning Emotional Data, And I think we will also get a sneak peek of our current work, something that is still in production, still in the making. So the teams that run through these works, you will see it in a minute, they are very urgent, very timely, because Elisa's work explores the complex relationship between data, automation, and human labor, and revealing certain aspects of our contemporary technologies that too often remain hidden behind the scenes. And it's important to reveal what is happening behind the scenes. The lecture will be followed by a Q&A, so be sure to also stay for that too. There will be time to ask questions and get a bit more in-depth into the topics. Also, small reminder, our next DDD lecture will take place on November 20th with Omar Al-Ghazi. And now I leave the floor to our guest. Please welcome Elisa Giardina Papa.
Hello? Okay, this is better. Hello, and thank you, Valentina, for the beautiful presentation. Thank you, Donatella, for inviting me here. I'm happy to be here and to have this chance to talk about my work and also to be in conversation with you after I finish to talk. So I will talk about my artistic practice by focusing on really quickly on 2 projects, but then really focus on one project, which is cleaning emotional data. And while I'm doing that, I will try to underline some of the theoretical questions which are grounding my practice. I will keep it quite short, like 35-40 minutes, so then we have time for questions and discussion. Okay, so I think actually Valentina made a great presentation and a summary of my work. And I also like to summarize my art research as an ongoing commitment to retrieve and to reactivate forms of knowledge, perception and desire that have been disqualified or rendered nonsensical by hegemonic demands for order and legibility. And I will go back quite a lot on this idea of order and legibility. So in my project, I sift through discarded AI datasets, and that is where I will focus on cleaning emotional data. But also cinema repositories, sensor cinema repositories. This, for example, I will not talk about this, but just to give you a sense of my practice, this is a project that I did about cinema censorship in Italy between the 50s and the 70s, so post-war period between the end of fascism and then the feminist and workers' movement and students' movement of the 70s. And this one, for example, is a work that I did as part of my collective. As Valentina was mentioning, I work as myself, but I'm also part of an artist collective with an artist from Uganda, Bashibo Kwenje, and an artist from India, Nupur Mathur. But I also work with travel accounts, sometimes fake colonial travel accounts. That is a project I'm doing at the moment. And at the end, I want to give you like a little preview of the project that I'm doing right now. I'm still in the editing phase. It will be a film, a video installation, and we're editing right now. So I just this morning took a little piece and I'll show it to you, even if it's not color corrected, it doesn't have audio, but just to give a sense of what I'm doing at the moment. And I do all these to try to trace how recurrent forms of extractive capitalism have strained our capacity for living, laboring, and desiring. I work across large video installations, experimental films, also internet-based or AI-based projects, and I do that to try to draw attention to those parts of our lives which I believe, nonetheless, remain radically unruly, untranslatable, and uncomputable. I repeat this, unruly, untranslatable, and incomputable or uncomputable. So for this talk, I will focus on a trilogy of video installations that I started in 2016, finished in 2022. The trilogy is dedicated to extractive capitalism, AI, and surrogate labor. So the relation between extractive capitalism, AI, and surrogate labor. And I will explain what I mean by surrogate labor in a moment. These three projects of the trilogy are Labor or Sleep, Have You Been Able to Change Your Habits? This is a video piece that was commissioned to me by the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. The piece addressed the politics and economies of sleep in relation to 24,000 capitalism. 24,000 capitalism is a term that was used by Jonathan Crary in the book that has the same title, 24/7 capitalism. And the book analyzes how digital global economies push us towards a restless activity that is eroding forms of community, is eroding and damaging the very fabric of everyday life. So thinking about these topics, I ended up producing this impossible, surreal sleeping tutorial that is both for humans and machines. So it's teaching and giving tips on making your sleep more efficient, both for humans and machines. And the second project of the trilogy is Technologies of Care, which is a video installation that explores the ways in which affective and care labor are being outsourced via internet platforms. So I'm talking about the gig economy. So the project is based on conversation that I had with precarious caregivers, gig workers, caregivers that work online through a variety of different platforms and apps. And by care labor, I mean broadly the labor of taking care of somebody else. So a labor that produces and modifies human relations. Under the category of care labor, I don't make any strict distinction between sex work, reproductive labor, aids provided to the body, the production of the other, and the creation of human relations. So I interview a series of workers. As you can see here, like worker 6 was an online dating coach that will be coaching people that use like Tinder, or I don't know what the new dating app is, but, Bumble, I don't know. At the time in which I did the project, it was OkCupid and Tinder. Worker 2 is a social media fund for hire that for $5 would deliver likes and comments on your social media profile. So we'll create this kind of like social emotional capital on demand. Worker 7 was a chatbot. So at one point I also decided to have a conversation with algorithms, chatbots. This is like pre-ChatGPT. So chatbots that performed emotional labor by trying to perform emotional intelligence. And lastly, the last project of the trilogy is cleaning emotional data, which is the work I want to be focusing on today. By not talking just about the kind of like aesthetic and formal choices of the installation, but also trying to tease out the kind of like research and theoretical questions that I posed to myself while I was producing the work. Sorry, drink some water. Okay, so cleaning emotional data specifically explores the ways in which machines are disciplined and trained to see. So it is a visual account that documents the methods that are currently used to teach AI to capture, reduce, and order the world, but instead consider everything in our lives that resists this kind of and defies these normative modes of categorization. So it poses to consider the excess, which is both outside and maybe also within computation, but it is an excess that cannot be fully captured by universal formal statistical structure of thought. And just to clarify, right at the beginning, when I'm talking about artificial intelligence, I'm not sure, I don't believe that it is intelligence. I see it mostly as statistics on steroids. Okay, so this work started as a research while I was doing my PhD at UC Berkeley. At the time I was back in Palermo, that is where I am originally from, and I was writing a paper on machine vision. And I want to mention that I was in Palermo because I believe that the content, the context in which you're thinking does change the way you're thinking. So I don't know if you're familiar with Palermo, maybe some other few is. Yes, I see some nods, okay. So I will say just one thing about Palermo, that if you have to imagine a self-driving car try to find the ways through the street of Palermo, exactly, you cannot but laugh, right? So it's that kind of like logic that just breaks down, and not because, I mean, because of the city, because of the people, because how the city function. So just keep this image in mind of the self-driving car trying to go through the street of Palermo, and that kind of like failure that is enabled by the city itself. So I was back in Palermo. I was doing this preliminary research, and while I was doing that, I ended up working for about 3 months as a human trainer for various AI systems. That is, I worked for so-called human-in-the-loop, this is how they're called, human-in-the-loop companies, to provide clean data for the training of AI systems. And I will explain in a second what I mean by clean data. Yeah, so by clean data, I mean data which are reduced, optimized, sanitized, tamed, and made behave to sustain the fiction that everything can be computed and formalized. So clean data, or in the case of machine vision, clean images, because I was mainly working with images, now with data. I mean, images as data points. So clean images can be understood as a further instantiation of what Harun Farooqi, which was a filmmaker, documentarist, termed as the operational image. Building upon Roland Barthes' idea of the operational language, Farooqi defines the operational image as an image that labor, an image that is working. So an image that fulfills a task within a technological operation. The notion of operational image has been then, for example, further elaborated by artist and scholar Trevor Plaglen in what he termed the invisible image, which for Plaglen points to the fact that images are increasingly made by machine for machines, with the human that is rarely in the loop. Which I believe is true, it is increasingly true. Yet, one could also ask which human exactly is excluded from this loop, right? Because as we know, at this point, thousands and thousands of workers, data cleaners, are needed to label, categorize, annotate, and validate massive amounts of data, thereby enabling AI to function, and specifically machine vision. So that is for machine vision to be trained and to be maintained. So it is a kind of cleaning, maintenance job. And this is how somehow I reconnect with technologies of care, which is a job which foreground care and effective labor. The human is not excluded from the loop of machine-to-machine communication. It is only invisibilized within this loop. So what it becomes invisible for me is not the laboring image, but it is actually the laboring human. And what you're seeing here are like some fragments of the hundreds and thousands of tasks that I did as a data cleaner. So this human-fueled automation or photomation, as for example Astra Taylor defines it, so fake automation, runs over the averaged micro-judgments of remote, underpaid, invisible workers, which are mostly working from the global south for companies that are based on the global north, and specifically in the United States. That is, the reflective judgment of the human worker is broken down into the minimum unit possible, abstracted, so there is no contingency, no given context for these micro-judgments, and then is flattened down into an average. So it becomes statistic. This is the way in which it becomes statistics, and it can then be read by the machine. So basically, workers' bodies and subjectivities are abstracted away to the extent in which their work can be ultimately perceived as and managed as one of the many operations of the machine. And here, like, I mean, all you see here are like all these like fragments of the task that I did during the period. In the caption, I'm writing down the instruction that was given to me, and also I want you to notice the reward. To try to understand what is this kind of like economy, right? For example, for these 5 images in which I was supposed to understand, according to my micro-judgment, which of this image was, sorry, I cannot read, I don't have my glasses. Okay, like it appears as more violent or less violent environment, in which I am not giving any context, right? I see the street and I'm supposed to quickly decide, according, I don't know exactly to which logic, which image in this case seems to me more violent or less violent. So the workers enfolded in this invisibilized socio-technical assemblage, which is bolstering AI, are often described by those who contract them as a temporary placeholder, right? So this is just a placeholder for this future of pure automation that is yet to come. So a future in which forms of labor that have been historically considered unskilled and non-creative will eventually be replaced by algorithmically enchanted machines. But again, one could ask, what is this particular understanding of technology a proxy for? What does it stand for? And according to Kalin Divora, for example, and Ned Antonosovsky, who wrote a book which is called Surrogate Humanity, automation as a proxy, as a stand-in for devalued work and devalued judgment is based on gendered and racialized imaginaries that recapitulates histories of disappearance, erasure, and elimination that are necessary to maintain the liberal subjects as the only agent of historical progress, right? So these kind of like tasks are still somehow like embedded in the machine and invisibilized. which is also like the valid work. I believe, when we are to open up the black box of these enchanted, algorithmically enchanted power machines, what we found inside is nothing more or not much more than the old entanglement of capital and labor exploitation and dispossession. Right, so this kind of like intensification of these old entanglements, and also the entanglements of technology and surrogacy. But also what we find inside the so-called black box is, for me, the ordering logic of modernity, the ordering logic of modernity. And I will go back to this in a second. So let me try to clarify why I'm talking about the ordering logic of modernity now by talking about specifically the cleaning of emotional data. So data points that are connected to systems that supposedly are able to recognize our emotions in faces. So the attempt to extract the hidden truth of interior emotional states using machine vision. So the attempt to make face behave so that emotion can be extracted. Okay, so among the tasks I perform as a data cleaner, specifically for affective computing systems or models, for instance, there was the labeling and rating of emotion in composite computer-generated faces. And here I want to pause again for a second, because these composite photography, even if these are digital photography, are quite reminiscent of, for example, the experiment the biometric eugenist Francis Galton did in the late 18th century using composite photography. So not digital photography, but photography. Francis Galton, as some of you might know, is the originator of the eugenic movement, and he devised the technique of composite portraiture. As a composite, it means like one image after the other, one face after the other, as a tool for visualizing different human types, criminals and segment of the population that he considered to be socially inferior. And here I wanted to pause this for a second, because we might need again to ask ourselves why this kind of like pseudoscience and technique are resurfacing in systems of AI, which are supposed to be connected to our futurity, and for sure not to the past, and for sure not to the past of technique of that has been used to develop the idea of eugenic. Another task that I did as a data cleaner, specifically here for affective computing systems, is also the labeling of micro expression in videos, according to the 7 strict categories, which are anger, contempt, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise. So these, according to this kind of system, are the only 7 categories in which we can express our emotions. Or for example, this was actually like really surprising to me, the rating of the confidence of a person based on their countenances. So in this case, I was supposed to rate a confident person in this image appeared to me. And you can see a lot of like the bias that can enter right in these kind of choices. But also things like the animation of 3D avatars with my own emotions. So like in this case, I was supposed to express an emotion of disgust by animating this bat. Not sure I did a great job with it. I tried. Maybe I did a better job with the zebra. In this case, the effect was that of surprise. which, let's say, I think is a little bit more convincing. Okay, maybe not. And again, this was like $0.35 each video. But also at one point I also found this task, and this was interesting because I started to do this kind of task because they were more remunerative. They were like paying me more because I was using my own face, of course. So there was this kind of like, direct extraction in which I was supposed to create these videos and simulate the emotion that were given to me. And this was actually a turning point in this project because right at the beginning, when I produced these videos, several of them were rejected. And I had no idea if they were rejected by an algorithm or they were maybe rejected by another worker, or maybe understood my facial expression in a different way due to cultural differences, right? But somehow, I don't know, my face was not happy enough, nor happy in the right way. So that to me became like I became more interested in trying to understand what is the logic of performing the correct emotion that can be understood by an algorithm. So I try to start to understand what are the default assumptions upon which AI emotion recognition models are trained. So the question for me became, compared to what ideal or maybe average happy face is my happy face compared, right? And maybe even more generally, then the question became, who gets to emote properly and who does not? And to understand what is called the ground truth, so the ideal expected result of AI-based emotion recognition systems, we actually need to go back to the 19th century. And this is like, now I reconnect to what I was trying to explain about the ordering logic of modernity, which is still embedded in these systems. So we need to go back to the so-called Duchenne smile. So the Duchenne smile is a smile that crinkles the muscles around your eyes. That is, if you're smiling, but you're just moving your mouth, and moving these like micro muscles, but you're not moving these micro muscles, that is understood according to this logic as a fake smile. But if you're moving this muscle and this muscle, that is understood as a true smile. So basically here we're going back to the myth of universality. Everybody's supposed to smile in the same way and to move the same muscles while you're smiling. We're going back to the myth of transparency. So this idea that whatever interior emotional state you have can be made transparent to the face. And we're going back to the myth of truth and objective measurements. According to which emotion can be measured within an ideal scale that can create the ground to make comparisons and judgments. So as Edouard Glissant, which is a philosopher and poet from Martinique, would say, no opacity is allowed. So we need to go back to the distressing medical and technological experiment that the French neurologist Duchenne de Boulogne made in the 19th century at the Saint-Péter Asylum. I don't know if you're familiar with Charcot and female hysteria, but Duchenne was a teacher of Charcot. And Charcot is the one who invented female hysteria at the Saint-Péter Asylum. So Duchenne links modern physiology with psychology, with older and heavily problematic ideas of physiognomy, and with the help of the new technology of the time, which was short exposure photography, he creates what he calls the universal map of emotion. And here, in terms of technology, there is also something interesting, because when you read Duchamp and like this book that he published about the human emotions, the way in which he's talking about short exposure photography is quite reminiscent of the way in which we are talking about new technology now, right? ChatGPT knows about you more than you do. And also this idea of the short exposure photography was understood as something that was able to see what the human eye could not see. So this kind of like also almost like optical unconscious of Walter Benjamin, right? And so this kind of like rhetoric that we keep seeing starting from the 19th century, a new technology that can reveal something that the human is not able to see. Okay, so this collection of photographs, which were also reproduced in Darwin, the expression of emotion in men and animals, Duchamp creates the photograph by clicking with electric probes the muscular contractions in the face of his patients to produce what he understood as the universal map of emotion. So you see here as emotions are analyzed, but somehow they're also constructed. So it would like, use these probes to kind of like click the muscular contraction and say, yeah, if you're moving this, but if you're moving this, it is a true smile. If you're not moving that, that is not a true smile. So similar to what, for example, Michel Foucault analyzed in this Charcot-Salpeter affair, what is essential here is the construction of an apparatus for the construction of truth. And here I want to pause for a second because the production of truth, which seems that is still key in identification systems like the one that I'm analyzing here on emotion recognition, which is an identification system, I'm actually not sure is still key in, for example, Gen AI, generative AI. I'm sure all of you have experience with ChatGPT, right? Which is a different system. It's not about identification, it's about generation of like text, images, etc. Because it seems to me that like these generative AI systems, rather than try to construct truth, they try to approximate, they create an approximation of truth, right? So a probably average of a simulation of truth. And this is just to remember that when we're talking about AI, we're never talking just about one system, right? It seems AI is this one system, but actually there are different logics according to the kind of like system models that you're using. Yeah, but let's go back to the construction of the apparatus of truth and the true universal emotion. And I know I went a little bit in this like historical digression here, but it is important because a century later, the psychologist Paul Ekman, with funds from the US Department of Defense, so before I was talking about the 1870s, now I'm talking about the 1970s. Paul Ekman builds upon Duchenne experiments to claim once again in the 70s that there are a small sets of universal emotions, and those emotions can be read directly from the face. So although the scientific community has clarified over and over again that emotions are not universal, but rather contingent, so it depends on the context, this logic and this kind of like reduced picture of the world is keep finding resurgences in these AI systems. To the point in which we might need to ask that when we're looking into the technology of today, are we really looking into the future, or rather we're looking into the past? So what is the connection with theory, pseudo-theory, by the way, that are keep resurfacing in this system, and they keep resurfacing just because they are computable. They're like somehow they are seemingly easily embedded in computation and machine logic. And these modern variant epistemologies embedded in AI systems, I think, can be clearly felt almost in a granular way when you spend some time cleaning data, as I did for 3 months. Again, to give you an example, 2 of the operations that I performed over and over again as a data cleaner were those of bounding and naming. Here I'm talking about machine recognition and the training, actually, of machine recognition. So bounding and naming, these are 2 key operations. That is to trace a border and defines the trace enclosure. Like in this case, what I was supposed to do is to trace polygons around each angelfish and flower, and just to say, well, you know, this is where the algorithm can be trained to recognize that as a flower. So I'm tracing the closure and I'm saying this is a flower, and this is how you're going to be trained to recognize flowers or angelfish from now on. But borders, as we know, are spatial arrangements, right? But also there are identitarian and cognitive processes. So if spatial borders structure the movement of bodies, cognitive borders also structure the movement of thought, right? By establishing conceptual hierarchies of identity and difference. So what is in the enclosure, I'm naming it that way, but what is outside of the enclosure, I'm naming it in a different way. They somehow also structure the movement of thought. So borders are both spatial and cognitive arrangement, for example, are one of the primary tools of colonial and imperial conquest, right? Borders and the name, what is within the borders and outside the borders, the enclosure and what is outside the enclosure. So maybe to fully address machine learning, what I'm proposing, also what the kind of line of thought I'm proposing is that we might need to start from what machine should start to unlearn instead. And we should start to consider as, for example, scholar and philosopher Luciana Parisi, which is Italian from Napoli, but teaches in the United States at Duke University, for example, does in the writing by addressing question of, in relation to computation, question of uncertainty, indeterminacies, and incomputables, and also questions of improper affiliation. And of difference without separability. So how do we rethink this way of teaching machine to see through borders and labeling in a different way that might be about thinking of difference without separability? Because in fact, while I was repeating over and over the operation of bounding and naming for my task as a data cleaner, I had, of course, moments of uncertainty. So even this idea that these are quick tasks that everybody can do, I quite disagree with it, because in certain moments I just didn't know what to answer. And I went to college, I have a master, I have a PhD, I should be able to answer the question, but it's actually not so easy in certain cases. For example, in this kind of funny image, which at one point I termed the couch woman, which is an image that plays with uncertainty, right? It's a little bit also kind of like a meme, it can be. No, there is a meme that is wearing the same as as your background.
That's the same picture.
Exactly. So when I kind of to me it was a funny image, but then at the same time, I had to trace the border, between the woman and the couch, and to me it was difficult to understand where the couch ended, where the woman ended, and so I started to think about the way in which, for example, Mel Chen which is a scholar at Berkeley, defines queerness in her book, which is Anima Cis, Biopolitics, Racial Mattering, and Queer Affect. And Melchen defines queerness in terms of the social and cultural formation of improper affiliation. So like in this case, to me, it started to look at this improper affiliation between the couch and the woman. And that can also sensation, you go back, I don't know, home, you're tired, you just lay down on the couch, and at one point maybe you don't know, where the couch ends and when your body begins. Instead, I started to think about that image and many other that I find while I was working as a data cleaner as these glimmers of improper affiliations, and I started to collect them. Some images that were posing a resistance to the normative ordering devices of AI, and while doing so, clarifying that this ordering embedded logic is both violent and delusional. And this is what I was trying to conjure with the image of the self-driving car trying to find its way in Palermo. There is a certain delusion there, right? And that is kind of like grid logic and ordering logic can always work. Okay, so all this research became a video essay in a 3-channel video installation in which I collect the task that I performed as a data cleaner, so basically all those short fragments that you saw while I was talking, and then I trace and critique the history of emotion starting from the 19th century until current times. So what is happening now with AI. And also I started to collect these glimmers of improper affiliations that seems to resist disordering logic. Okay, so I stop in these glimmers of incomputability, which I will come back at the end, while I will just give you like a short preview of the work that I'm doing at the moment. But before I do that, maybe let me take a look at the time. Am I? No, that's good. Other 10 minutes? I don't want to. Okay. So before I do that, the glimmers of incomputability, let's keep that there for a second. Maybe I'll give you some details about the formal choices of the installation, because I've just been talking about the research, but let's talk about the artwork for a second. So the 3 videos are playing in monitors that are protected by these privacy filters. When I'm talking about the privacy filter, I don't know in Italy, but for sure when you go through, for example, security check, a visa, like passport check in the United States, and you get the passport, and then there is this man who's like checking data in this monitor that you cannot see, even if you try, right? And so that is a privacy filter, which is usually black. I use one that is golden pink, but it's the same logic, in which basically if you are in front of the monitors, which have this filter on top, you can see the image, but then if you move a little bit up, down, basically 30-degree angle, up, down, left, right, you cannot see the image anymore. So I wanted to play a little bit, of course, with this idea of visibility, invisibility, because here I'm talking, of course, about invisible labor, right? Like nobody's talking about the labor of cleaning data. It seems that AI needs to be fully autonomous without labor. And also I wanted to ask the viewer to do a little bit of work with her body. So I'm asking a little bit of active viewership, right? You're not entering the gallery and the video is just there. You can have to like move and look for the right position to look at the video. And then on the floor, you have these silver textiles that I digitally embroidered with words that are coming from the Sicilian language. So words such as recrio, rabbia, babbaria, which are coming from the Sicilian language and express emotions that are not fully translatable in Italian, nor in English. I'm sure many of you speak different languages, and there are certain things that specifically about emotions that are usually difficult to fully translate, right? So I wanted to embroider these words in the textile to problematize this idea of a possible universal language of emotion by using something that is extremely local, untranslatable, so not fully translatable, and a kind of language that, for example, ChatGPT cannot understand. I try, and each time I do it also, like, I'm a little bit worried about try, because each time we use ChatGPT, we're also training ChatGPT, right? So it's a strange and difficult relation that we need to have with these systems, because they're extracting, right? For now, ChatGPT cannot simulate Sicilian. So it is a language that is contingent, is a language that is fleeting, which is also a language that is subaltern, right? You can use it, you cannot use it to write or speak in school. So it's not efficient, it's not orderly, and it's not fully computable. Okay. So now let's go back to the tension between incomputability, order, and description, which is a topic that I keep working on. But this time, instead of working with the I decided to go back to the 18th century this time. So I'm producing a new project, which is a film, and which is titled She Flickered In and Out of History. She Flickered In and Out of History, even if I might change the title. The project needs to be done by March 2026. And is a video installation, and also will be a glass installation, but the video is the main component that recounts the tale of an island that emerged and disappeared from the Mediterranean Sea, specifically between Sicily and Tunisia. So we're talking about the 1831, that is the moment in which the Ottoman Empire is crumbling, basically. France colonized Algeria just the year before. United Kingdoms were in Malta. Italy was now a unified country. Like in Sicily, we had the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies with the Bourbon crown. So it was a moment in which the politics of the Mediterranean were reordered. Right? And it was also the period of the colonial craze of the European power towards the Mediterranean. So you have to imagine this new island that emerged from an underwater volcanic eruption, and all these colonial powers sent ships to claim the island. They gave it 12 different names. They try to measure in any way possible, which is kind of funny because the island is also a shapeshifter, because the volcanic is erupting and is creating the island, but then the sea is taking away pieces of the island. Photography was not invented, we just have drawings. Each drawing is completely different than the other, because every day the island was like shape-shifting and changing. So they almost started a war to get this like piece of basalt formation in the middle of the Mediterranean. But 5 months later, the island disappeared under the water. So I'm telling this tale as a political fable, right? In which I'm reflecting to everything that is happening right now in Gaza, what is happening in Gulf of Mexico, which is becoming Gulf of America, Ukraine. So we're still there, like the land. Who belongs to the land belongs to whom. And this somehow was also the kind of like terra nullius, right? So the dream of the colonizer, finally, really, a piece of land that was empty. Okay. these are some of the images, stills from the editing, and I will show you, I decided to show you a small fragment. Again, I'm editing this right now. This morning I was in Palermo editing, I arrived here, and tomorrow I'll go back to edit again. And so it is just a short fragment, there is no audio, the color correction is not right yet, but just to give you a sense. Okay. Maybe the light we should have. Sorry, didn't ask before. I didn't notice. At least for the. Maybe we should have done this before. Okay. Okay. I think it's this one which is a bit annoying, but maybe. See? You can see it? Okay. Yeah? Should I? Okay. Oh no, thank you. Wait. Okay, here.
This one, yeah, this is working. Thank you very much, Elisa. This was for your wonderful presentation. And I would like to ask you if you have any questions or comments about the work. Anyone wants to ask Elisa something? I'm sure someone has something to ask. Okay, I'm going to start. First of all, like personal curiosity, like when you were working as a data cleaner, are there any requirements like that you need to meet in order to be hired, or anyone can like apply? Like, what are the questions that you have been asked, right, in the process of like applying for those kind of jobs?
None. None, because that is the point of this kind of labor, right? Mm-hmm. It's structured in a way in which you're becoming like one of the operation of the machine. They don't really care, like who you are, what you're doing.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, and this is so. There is a sort of like anonymity in which you just have to do the task. If you do the task, somebody else will do. So there are not any kind of like background skills that is really required. And also what is interesting to me and a little bit discomforting is also that you don't know who you're working for. Something that happened, for example, like last year or like more than 1.5 years ago, is a lot of these gig workers understood that they've been training the algorithm that was later used for like a war drone. Right, so you're just receiving the task and you're using your little things. And then if it's going to be used for war, it's going to be used from some more like progressive dimension possible of AI, you have no idea. So they don't know who you are and you don't know who they are.
I think that adds a very dark dimension. If we need yet another one.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if you have something that you want to.
Thank you so much, Elisa. It was a wonderful talk, and thank you for showing us also the preview of your work. I have many questions, but I'll stick to one. Hopefully other people will jump in. I think it's extremely important that you actually went back to Galton and you traced back the history of these technologies, because it's important that people realize that there is in fact a link between this so-called pseudoscience, as you have underlined, because it was actually pseudoscience, and how this pseudoscience has been actually transformed into the hegemonic machine of today. So it's important to actually position AI, I think, in a lineage of colonial technologies of control and surveillance. So I think this is a great point that you raised. One of the reasons I think that it's important, as you said, also to underline is that, in fact, even if it was already criticized as being pseudoscience, yet it had a very good selling point from a profit point of view, which is that, in fact, it's computable.
Exactly.
So it's something that can be quantified, and actually, I encourage those of you who are interested in the topic to read Kate Crawford's book, Atlas of AI, which is a very simple and engaging reading, in which also there is a chapter about the story behind the ways in which actually this pseudoscience was actually was given a value by actually the US administration, which was looking for ways to wage war, intelligence war also against enemies. And this is pretty much also a history of technology, as we know in the internet, always connected to war. So I think this was like the turning point in which something that wasn't really a science, but yet it was computable, quantifiable, and therefore it could generate profit.
Exactly.
Whereas you work with something that is, by definition, as you also pointed out, unquantifiable. Now the question, which I think is of course big, but we keep asking it, all of us who work in critical media studies, is do you think there is a way to hack into this system? Because the way in which AI has been built as a system, overall, even if there are different AIs, as you have also well underlined, but do you think there is a way to hack into the system and build another path toward AI?
Exactly, and this is the question. Like, there is a part of me, I will start with no. In the sense that maybe not. Or at least we need, I think the work that needs to be done, that has been done in the last, I feel, decade, starting with Wendy Chen, Lisa Nakamura, no? They were the first who started to really debunk this, open up this black box and be like, okay, yeah, they're not natural, of course. That even 15 years ago, everybody was convinced that technology was numbers, so of course it cannot be biased. And a lot of these scholars started to go back and be like, no, it is biased. And this is how you trace it back. You need to do work that goes a little bit back in the history of modernity, modern thought, to see what is still there. right? And so to me, it doesn't work to differentiate data, because there was also the moment in which we're like, yeah, data should be different, you know, because until now we just have, I don't know, like face recognition system that's just trained to like Stanford University professor, which are all white, all Americans. So let's change the data, let's see what happens. But to me, it's like the same logic that is embedded in this system, that it is a logic of modernity, and the logic of modernity is a logic of conquest and differential power between a part of the world and the other part of the world. So yes, it can be done, but maybe it's not even more about like hacking, but just rethink it. Like, can we think about machine vision without that works on, and I'm an artist, so I can say that because I don't intend to, you know, program an algorithm, but like, can we think about machine vision that does reason in terms of disorder and not ordering of C? Like, there is something about this, the same set of value that needs to be reworked. And then from there, maybe we can rethink about after different, you know, techno systems. So I'm not completely sure that hacking is enough. But it's a good start. I mean, yes, we should hack everything that we can, but that system comes from a specific value, specific way of looking at the world. Then it's a complex answer, and I'm not giving like at the beginning of an answer, but I'll be happy to, like, we need to talk about it.
Appetizer.
Exactly.
Thank you. Let's see if there are other questions in the room or curiosities. Yes.
Mine is more of a curiosity of one of the projects that you showed in the first part of the talk on sleep, because I work on night, and I'm very well aware of all of the literature, including Crary, and this idea of the colonization of night and sleep by technology, starting from the electrification up until today's smartphones and then AI. And then you mentioned that you, in your work on sleep, you were giving some sort of techniques of resistance for humans and for the machine, if I understood well. So if you wanted to talk about a little bit about that, especially the one on machine, which is very interesting.
It was not really a technique of resistance. It was more of surreal tutorial. Because, you know, I mean, if you're working on this, you know that, you know, at one point all these like sleeping apps become like so famous, but that also speak to the kind of like culture of efficiency, right? Which I live in the United States since 16 years, and this idea of like, you know, how do you become the perfect human? How do you become more efficient in everything, you know, of your life? How do you study better? How do you do like, I don't know, like, you know, this idea of efficiency. And to me, it just started to be crazy that sleep could be efficient. I mean, sleep is the moment in which we're not producing. It's supposed to be the moment in which we're not efficient. So there is not such a thing as efficient sleeping. To me, this was not a technique of resistance, but it was a little bit like a surreal how-to. Like tutorials in which it was the kind of like same tutorial for both machines and humans. So I didn't really invent like the technique of resistance, but to me, and I'd be more curious about how you work on sleep, right? Because to me also all this work about sleep, emotions, care, are those areas of our life in which capital and efficient is not supposed to enter, right? Like, you cannot be efficient in love, you cannot be efficient in your emotions, you cannot be efficient in care. Care is also like a continuous failure, as we know if we took care of somebody. sleep as well. So like to me, it was more like thinking about what is still outside of capital and what is actually not, you know, and how like this kind of like logic is like of extraction is grabbing and expanding into those realms in which we don't have to be efficient.
Hi, I had a curiosity more than anything, and I don't know if you know the answer, but do you have a rough estimate of how many data cleaners there are in the world?
No. I'm really bad with numbers. Even I had a friend the other day he came to Palermo. I was like, how many citizens, population of Palermo? Like, I don't know. Like, I have problems with numbers, but a lot.
I was trying to wrap my head around how, like, these big AI companies, like I saw Nvidia is now worth 15 trillion, how they can kind of get away with paying cents on each different thing that kind of funds their entire process.
Yeah. No, but it is like a super big economy that is like keep changing. I mean, you have content moderation, you have like, you know, this kind of like cleaning data, and the economy is quite interesting and like, you know, sad in the way in which also is changing the logic of migrant labor. Right, because before, like, you know, there was like, you know, movement of people that would move towards jobs, but now what the gig economy does is that you never leave your country, right? So it is kind of like quick economy that moves really quickly and open up this kind of like sourcing of cheap labor in every possible country that has an economic problem. So at one point, a lot of data cleaner or content moderators were in Greece, when Greece was in like economic crisis. Then it was Venezuela. Then now it's like Uganda is like another place. So it's just like moving quickly and kind of like sourcing the cheapest labor possible. But that is invisible, underpaid human infrastructure that is sustaining AI in every way possible. Also ChatGPT. So I'm not good with numbers, so I cannot give you like a straight number, but it is a big part of the economy of AI.
Just have a quick comment on what you just said, because it's very interesting that, as you pointed out, it's moving very fast. In fact, I saw last year a piece by Hito Steyerl, quite famous artist here in Germany, and she was the piece was called Mechanical Kurds. This is a pun because Mechanical Turks is actually the micro labor platform run by Amazon, in which data labelers or content moderators or like every sort of micro task is actually outsourced over there. And the piece is about data cleaners in a refugee camp, in a Syrian refugee camp in Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan. And then it's a very interesting piece. And after seeing the piece, I asked Hito to put me in touch because I wanted to interview the person. And she said, the job is gone. I mean, as you said, they moved out. I mean, for a time they were in the camp because it was convenient and efficient from a profit point of view. But as soon as they found something else, cheaper, more stable, they just left. And she was in fact jobless.
Yeah, exactly.
All the people in the camp. Exactly. So it is in fact an economy that is moving very fast. I wonder though, and I think it will be interesting also to reflect upon this, now we are witnessing also a new phase of data, which is synthetic data. Mm-hmm. So data produced by AI, not by humans. So I wonder if you have a take on this. What about cleaning synthetic data, or is there such a thing as cleaning synthetic data? What's the future of data work?
There are a lot of people. I mean, two things. One is that also we're all cleaning data, right? Like when we're using ChatGPT, like we're all trainers of these systems, and we're all like sourced. And then there is a problem of synthetic data, because more and more data which are generated by AI will be back into the internet, and then these AI systems are like, taking those data back. It seems that will create a conflict and somehow make ChatGPT hallucinate, or this kind of, not just ChatGPT, and so on, generative AI hallucinate. So there seems to be like a real problem about synthetic data. That kind of like, like reducing the affidability of the system.
I was thinking, like, do you think that the human gaze is being influenced by this, like, performing this kind of task over and over again? Like, the fact that we are kind of, not only for, I mean, of course, like, for the people that are actually doing that kind of job. Right. Maybe you can have, like, I don't know, if you have like a personal experience that you can share, like after performing that kind of task for hours and hours, like when you go back and you look at the world, do you see the world differently? Like, is that kind of categorizing and like tracing lines, like influencing your gaze back, like as when you look back at the world? But also more in general, like, is this computational gaze like influencing human gaze? Like, are we kind of suffering this kind of boomerang effect? Do you see that happening?
I think we are. And you know how also like now the iPhone is like tracing those, everybody had this experience, right? They implemented like, I don't know, a couple of months ago, you click something, it's like segmenting. This is like called image segmentation. And to me also what is surprising, and this is why I'm saying we're back to the logical modernity, is that it seems even as an idea of subjectivity, to me is like such a modern idea of subjectivity in which you're like bounded in the whole, and divided somehow from the rest, which is a logic, which is like a modern logic, right? I remember like Freud, for example, says that there are two moments in which we are losing our boundaries. One is when you have a psychosis, you're losing the kind of like boundaries between like, your psyche and the id, which in Italian, I don't know what it is, but whatever. Right? And the other moment is when you fall in love, right? So also that there is something interesting about going back to this idea of like boundedness and wholeness, which is so modern, like the postmodern didn't like that. And we were thinking we were going towards like a different kind. When we started to talk about the, what is called, the 2000 and the internet, it was not just us, it was this kind of like what is it called? In which everybody is making like one of the decision, but there was this idea of like collectivity. Even Wikipedia, this idea of like, collaboration, in which is
collective intelligence.
Collective intelligence, right? Yeah. And now it seems we're kind of like,
the wisdom of the crowd.
The wisdom of the crowd. And now it seems we're going back to, because of social media, but also this kind of like bounding, and enclosure, which to me is really strange, because I thought we were done with that, with the subject that was a whole and not fragmented. So maybe it is changing the way in which we're thinking about subjectivity and identity. And maybe this like craze about identity politics, which of course are really important, but also sometimes, they also have like something that just doesn't work. I don't know, but that is for sure something that will be interesting to like talk more and see how this is influencing.
Thank you. Okay, so maybe we can just thank Elisa for being with us. Thank you, Elisa. Thank you. And thank everyone. Thank you everyone for coming, and I'll see you for the next DDD. The 20th? Okay, so the next DDD lecture will be in the new building, so not this Aula Magna, but the other one, but we will put out announcements next week, I believe. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.